Hello, and welcome to the tour of Onon Acre Farm. My name is Matthew Martino. I started this farm this year. Today is July 20th, and tomorrow will be the very first market day. So I'll just show you around the farm. You'll see kind of how it's set up and what I'm growing, and then you can get an idea of where the food I'm selling is coming from. Okay, we'll just start. And this is the main plot. This is the largest plot. It's in the front yard. And let's see, this area is a little bit of a mess. Just trying to grow some cantaloupe here. They really didn't take off too well. To their side, you can see I planted radishes next to them. And that's kind of what this first strip is. Second area, we've got, these are collard greens. These need to be spaced a little bit or thinned. This area was just replanted with some kale and radishes and lettuces. Here we've got our herb row. We got basil. There's some catnip here, trying to grow. Catnip germination was not too good. It's very, very small seeds. In those cases, they need to be right at the surface. The surface dries out. While they're trying to germinate, they might not survive. So you got to overseed it, which I definitely learned for next year. And then the last herb on this bed is cilantro. You can see it's got the serrated, sort of softly serrated leaves. Okay, the next area is sort of what I call the short rows of kale, chard, and lettuce. So to start, I'll show you this is what the red kale or Russian kale looks like. Okay, so half of this short row is Russian kale, and then we have the lacinato or Dino kale. Intermixed somehow, some red cabbage showed up. Whether it was either a seed packet contamination, because the seeds look identical, kale and cabbage, or whether I accidentally dropped it there, hard to say. Lastly, then filling out this short row is your more standard, I guess the more commonly seen kale, which is sort of a ruffled green curly kale. In between all of the beds, I planted clover, which is a nitrogen fixer. And when the clover gets ready to flower, it'll get mowed down, and over time it'll act basically as what they call it, green manure, and it'll build nitrogen into the soil. Okay, so heading back this way, we got some heads of red Redina lettuce. And we've got a sort of a ruffly green lettuce. I can't recall the variety of this one. And then we've got Grand Rapids lettuce, which looks very much like a romaine, sort of a roundy smooth-edged green lettuce. Going back over here, we got chard. That sort of iconic veining, especially the red veining really shows up. Mostly the red germinated for some reason. This was a rainbow chard mix, meaning it has yellow, red, and white Swiss chard. But it seemed like the red germinated better out of that seed grouping for some reason. Okay. Next area, which has some posts and some trellising twine, or tomatillos. Tomatillos are in the tomato family. It's a little more tender of leaf. These had a bit of a infestation of potato beetles and their larvae initially, but we were able to get that infestation down. You can see the tomatillos grow in sort of a encasing, like a papery, what I would call like a lantern. So like a Chinese paper lantern. And it's in here, and it's going to bulk up. Next, I have two long rows where it's a mix of winter squashes and then snap beans and radishes. Mostly the radishes have matured and they've either been picked or they've been sort of thinned out, because eventually they're the quick germinators, quick growers, and eventually they start flowering. You can see here, it's one of the squash. The mix of winter squash that were planted were the most common, which is the butternut, and then acorn, and a few other hybrids of those types. The beans were planted sort of in a row next to them. A combination of your standard sort of green bean and then what they call dragon tongue. Which I'll be able to show more of that in a different section, which actually has some beans on it. Okay. And we're coming through a tomato area. This was sort of some extra tomato plants I had that I decided to, why not plant them. And you see the trellising system I'm using are these wooden posts. They were cut out of saplings, upon which a top line of baling twine is sort of strung across the top. This one's sagging, most of them. Once they start getting fruit and you tie them, they start sagging. The tomatoes are growing pretty well. Some of them are just starting to blush. It's only a matter of maybe a week or two that a lot of them will start ripening. Okay, so here's one of my first summer, well, it's a zucchini. This is a gray zucchini. You can see there's one fruit on here that needs to be picked very soon. You can see the size of my hand. It takes my whole hand to pick this one up. That one's probably going to be good for zucchini bread. And I've got some young, just your standard yellow, here's a rotter, yellow summer squash. Sometimes the fruits, they start and then they they get end rot for some reason. So a number of those. Cabbages, more kale. Here's a much more mature lacinato kale. You can see how many leaves it puts out, and its stem gets real thick. It's real thick here. You can't, to pull this out of the ground would be a lot of effort. And you'll notice on a lot of my plants there are little holes, which is not going to be great for marketability, but I'll just call it evidence that it's organic. Okay, some mixed greens, green lettuces, red lettuces, the red chardian. This is my main summer squash and zucchini area. You can see the standard green zucchini, a few of them growing here. And then this squash is more of a winter squash. It's really taken off. It's running in this direction, away from where it started, which is way over here. And it's already producing a fruit. Ooh, lots of gray zucchinis here, as you can see. Some really big ones, some babies, a few rotters, but it's always going to happen. Got in this mess, which needs to be weeded out today, there are peppers. Here's the pepper plant with flowers. Probably a good idea to pick a few of these flowers off. I don't want this plant thinking that this is its end point. I need it to grow more. And it's kind of surrounded by weeds a little bit, along with a line of kale here that sort of needs some help to have its own space. So you can see these little tiny peppers starting to form. I only want so many of them though, until the plant's big enough to really support the fruit. Okay, now we'll move on to the sort of upland area of the property. Okay, this area I planted a row of eggplant, which have not been very happy thus far. I finally have a flower on one of them. Very furry, thick leaves. The soil might not be the best spot for them because they need well-drained soil. They don't mind it being kind of dry. Okay, now I'll take you into the primary tomato area, which you can see all these posts and all the twine. We have lots of different varieties. This is going to be sort of a Roma sized, but probably a yellow fruit. I try to do some companion planting, which is some basil. This is a purple basil. Basil with tomatoes is recommended. Here's a green basil and purple basil next to each other, along with more of this ubiquitous weed that we have here. Okay, I got a row of cherry tomatoes. You see some of them are getting red. Getting ready. There's lots on here, as you can see. Plenty of those. And then we got my newest favorite companion flower, which is borage. These things can get crazy thick. Like you see the thickness of this stem here. They start off pretty small, and it's actually quite surprising to see them this big. They make these wonderful pale bluish, purplish flowers that the bees love. Here's a good example of I believe these are the black crim tomatoes. Not sure if you can see how the shoulders, these are like they call the shoulders dark, basically near the stem attachment. They don't lose their pigment there, so it'd be very dark red, or a normal red somewhat, on the underside. And then here it's a combo of green and red, so it becomes almost a black color. More borage. You can see how many flowers there are. The bees come to them. I have a wildflower area. It's a combination of different wildflower mix, and the white flowers are buckwheat. Buckwheat is known to attract pollinators. And I've got just various flowers have come up. Okay, now we've arrived at the pea and bean trellis area. I have a series of horizontal strings and then vertical strings. Here's an example of the Kentucky Wonder green bean. Starts off on the ground, and then the vertical lines allow it to wrap round and round and round. And already it's about, this one's about 3.5 to 4 feet up. And here's your standard sugar snap peas. You can see making plenty of peas at this point. Some of the plants have reached my height. I might need to put an additional sort of miniature post up here so I can send another line higher across to give those more space to go up even higher. The last area I'll show you, I call it the cage. I have 1 minute of video left, so this is going to be brief. But you enter the cage. And I've got okra. You can kind of see one okra forming here. And then a lot of my peppers. I think these are habaneros. These are like a bell pepper. It could be green, it could be red, I can't remember. If they turn red, I'll know they're red. Right now they're bearing some fruit. A lot of beans. We got dragon beans, yellow beans, green beans, and then the remaining pepper plants. These are going to form small sweet peppers